Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Birth in Focus. Today we have Midwife Sabrina here. She's going to be talking about such a huge and such an important topic. We're going to kind of cover the differences between urban birth and rural birth, right? Am I saying all of that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so we're going to talk about kind of the importance, just the important things to know, depending on where you're giving birth, things to consider, and so much more. But I'm going to let her do all of that. So let's get started with an intro from you. Tell us all about Sabrina.
Okay. I'm Sabrina Elliott. So I was a doula for 8 years in Abilene, Texas, and then became a midwife out of just a necessity for more VBAC options in my town. I really have a love for vaginal birth after cesarean. And that is a very small town. It's about 140,000 people and growing. I also, once I became a midwife, then I saw that there was a need for a midwife in San Angelo, Texas. So I had two offices about an hour and a half apart.
Wow.
And so I would take care of both clients in both spaces. And I think that town is about 117,000, so a little smaller. Anyway, but definitely out in the middle of nowhere, out in the country. So I came to midwifery just out of working in a hospital setting, mostly as a doula. I rarely did any home births, but I just was getting really frustrated with seeing inductions that were happening, especially with first-time moms, and them not really feeling like they could trust me as a person to give them advice because I didn't have a degree. I didn't have any kind of background and education on medical information. And so they trusted their doctor more than me as a doula. And a lot of times I saw where that really failed them. So I just really felt like I needed to do something more. So.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I can't imagine having two offices that are an hour and a half away from each other.
Yeah. And as when I first started in as a midwife in Abilene, I was one of two, and then there was 5. So by the time I was getting wrapping up everything in that area, there weren't any midwives in San Angelo. And so most of my time was spent in San Angelo, which is an hour and a half away.
Mm-hmm.
And there is such a large need in that area. But now there's been more midwives that have kind of come up that are able to service that area, which made me feel okay about moving to the big city to be near my children a little bit more.
Yeah. Okay. So we're definitely going to dive into that. So before we really break down the differences,
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about so you did just recently make a big move.
Yes.
So you moved from where to where?
So I lived in Abilene. I grew up in Lubbock. I lived there until I was about, 25. Mm-hmm. Then I moved to Abilene. I lived there for 19 years.
Okay.
And now I live in East Fort Worth and have a home birth practice there.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So you moved here to be closer to your kids, right?
Yeah, I have 6 children, and my youngest, I knew I wanted to move back to move to DFW. I haven't ever lived here before, but it felt like I lived here because this is where I trained.
Okay.
And I really wanted to be back in this space where there is more access to other things. And I felt like I have a calling to be more in the political scene of midwifery.
Okay.
Which you've probably seen some this week.
Yes, I did see some of that this week.
So I really wanted to move into that bigger space, but also my youngest was going to go to UNT, and she is she writes her own music, and that's her gifting. And I'm seeing my other children kind of trickle this way. So
that's amazing.
I really have a heart to be near them and us still be kind of close knit family, because that's how we have been this whole time. I homeschooled my kids, so we do love spending time together.
That's so sweet. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Okay. So let's dive into then let's start off with, I guess, what is the difference between urban birth and rural birth? What are some common terms and phrases that go along with that? Maternity deserts and, all of that. What makes those things essentially different?
Okay. The word that you used is perfect, maternity desert. There are so many counties in Texas that are considered maternity deserts, which means that they don't have access to a labor and delivery ward. So there may be a hospital or a small community medical center, but they don't have actual labor and delivery with access to an OR. So that puts them in a very dangerous place, in the fact that there's not somebody on call all the time for anesthesia or an OB in the hospital at all times. That especially is true in San Angelo. Instead of Abilene has more access to that. But in San Angelo, they do have OBs, they do have labor and delivery. They have two hospitals. One is all of the OB is in one hospital in downtown San Angelo. But they don't always have somebody on call that's physically present. So there was one time when I was doing a birth, it was 35 miles outside of San Angelo. And all of a sudden we realized there's an emergency. So we start heading in and we're flying down the highway and the anesthesiologist is passing us. So, it's just like they're rushing. Luckily I call and I give a report and kind of let them know what's happening so that everybody else can round up their crew to kind of get there too.
Right.
And those are, even though they have access to that, I would consider that a maternity desert in a way, because you're still talking about those outlying areas that are flooding into that bigger city, which is still a small city.
Yeah.
So as far as like urban, I would consider, obviously DFW is an urban town. There's lots of hospitals to choose from, lots of different practitioners.
And every city within the Metroplex, for the most part, has its own hospital.
Right.
Like, I mean, it's not just you have to travel to Dallas. I mean, there's
right.
Grapevine, Fort Worth, Denton, Louisville. Yeah, all of these cities surround, like Dallas has a handful of hospitals, but then so does almost every city outside of it.
Right.
Some are better than others, obviously, but
right. So you've got like Medical City and you've got Baylor and Presby and all the different places that you can choose from. So it gives you more options.
Yeah.
And that also puts people at a disadvantage when they live far away, because you'd think, okay, well, this is just a smaller hospital. That's all I have to worry about. But say somebody lives in, like, I'm trying to think of town, Eden, Texas, on which, if you're a hunter or you drive to Fredericksburg, you might drive through there. They usually have lots of murals and they have the best beef jerky around and all the things, right? But that could be an hour and a half from the nearest hospital. So if you have a family, a small family, young family, and you're having babies, what are you going to do?
Right.
Because you don't always know when a baby is coming, right? And you don't always have a heads up. If it's your fifth baby,
you're right.
You may not have an hour and a half to get to a hospital. So yeah, those are the kinds of people that I usually have a heart for.
Yeah. So I guess, would you say, like, as a midwife, like, your goal was to kind of bridge that gap to, like, bring that prenatal care to those places? Like, is that why you became a midwife? Or?
Well, when I was in that area, that was more so. Now I feel like I have a voice for those people. And even though I am living in East Fort Worth, I have a very large traveling radius. And my goal right now is to kind of focus on like heading down towards like Weatherford, Granbury, and even further south towards like Brownwood.
Okay.
There's a student that I had when I was in Abilene and San Angelo. I think she's going to be an excellent midwife, and she wants to stay in the Brownwood area. And I would really love to be able to take clients kind of between her and I so that she could finish up and then also build her own practice there.
Yeah.
So I feel that it's important that those areas that don't have midwifery care gain access to it as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess for you as a midwife, especially, working in both urban and rural areas, what does that look like for you? Like in your care, does your care change at all or shift in any way? Like, what are some similarities and differences in your care based on where your client is having their baby?
Sure. I think the type of client that I see is different in general.
Okay.
So we'll come back to that.
Okay.
But as far as, I feel like there's more education to be had because you have to have the conversations of what happens if I don't get here. What happens if we're far away and there is an emergency.
Right.
What does that look like? You have to give a lot more informed consent about the possibilities of things that could happen and how far out we are, and then give options and thoughts of how we could do it differently. It doesn't necessarily have to be a home birth, but you could still have a birth in a home. So does that mean someone else's home that's closer to town, or closer to this a hospital? Okay. Do we want to try to rent a B&B or some sort of vacation rental home? Sometimes people don't have the funds for that.
Yeah.
And so that puts them at a disadvantage as well. And there have been times where I've delivered babies in a hotel. So those have a little easier access to grab, last minute.
Yeah.
But all of those things play into the mother's head, right? Because now you're in a space that is more loud, or maybe you're afraid that you might be heard, and just feeling that somebody might be at the door at any moment. So it's not your space. It doesn't feel the same way. So you also have to combat the mental parts of that,
right.
of making it feel like it's their space, making them feel safe and comfortable, making them understand that you're taking care of all the extras, all the other little details. But a lot of it has more to do with a lot of different types of informed consent than there are in an urban area.
So I was thinking, like, I guess as far as informed consent, and again, like letting the mom decide, like the conversation, it sounds like the conversations are just a lot different because like you were saying, you have such a large travel radius. And so there is the possibility of you not getting to them in time. Yeah. Which I mean is unfortunately a fear for everyone to some degree, but it's drastically, emphasized when you're in these large areas where there's less coverage. Yeah. So I guess like, having conversations with the family about, if you choose to stay here, like this is what could happen and you could end up birthing without me. And if I'm not here are options. Like I'm assuming you would do like a phone call or FaceTime, and or also just a lot of conversations about what they as a couple need to do if that happens. Yeah. But then also if you're not comfortable, it's just, again, it comes down to everything, like the same as everything else. It's whatever you're comfortable with. Right. Are you comfortable with the idea of potentially birthing by yourself? Or are you more comfortable with, finding a place a little closer to birth, like a hotel or a rental? I would love to hear a little bit more about your hotel birth. Okay. Because that is so cool. Yeah. I've never heard of that before. I mean, it makes total sense. I mean, it's definitely something, I can see people considering. I mean, hey, hotels have amenities, let's do it. It's better than a hospital. Yeah. Their amenities, I'm sure, are better. But yeah, so can you tell me a little bit about that?
I think the other thing that people... I don't know. I mean, I feel like I have a strong faith in God. I believe that He works out the details and He goes before me. And so I do think that makes me feel a little bit more at ease about things. Absolutely. Do I think that bad things happen? Absolutely. Yeah. Am I cautious about the possibility of them happening? Yes. And do I cover myself as far as having medications and things like that will help in those certain situations? Yes. And so maybe in a little bit we can talk about even like standing orders and what that looks like.
Oh yeah, I would love to talk a little bit more. Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, we'll definitely go into that. I just want to hear the fun story first about the hotel birth, and then we can talk about all the ways that you're prepared for all the things.
So I think I had this family that had come to me. They had had births in a birth center in San Angelo. Okay. The birth center had closed and now there was no longer a practicing midwife there. And so I lived in Abilene. They lived, it was, I'm trying to remember the name of the town, but it was near Eden. It was an hour and a half out from San Angelo. And I was an hour and a half from San Angelo and Abilene. And they had 3 children. This was going to be their 4th. It was a surprise baby. They didn't know what it was going to be. She had 3 little boys. And so they were really just feeling they didn't feel great about being in their town, A, because there wasn't a hospital, but B, because this was a fourth and they felt like it could come fast.
Okay.
She had had a fast previous birth. And so she wanted to, like, the moment that there were contractions, she wanted to start moving that way. And so we talked about all the different options. She had a couple of Airbnbs picked out, but you can't necessarily schedule with one at 2 a.m. if that comes up.
Yeah.
So she knew that the backup plan would be to be in the hotel.
Okay.
And so there were several that had big suites, and she felt like, okay, these could be great backup options.
Yeah.
She had her car loaded all the time with her, her birth tub and supplies and towels and all the things that you would normally have at a home birth. And then I had mine loaded with all of my equipment all the time. So when the time came, it was the middle of the day. It wasn't in the middle of the night. And they were working on the idea of the Airbnb, but I think she felt like it could come fast. So they just went ahead and went with the idea of a hotel.
Yeah.
And of course, we brought in our birth tub.
That is epic.
In the middle of the living room space. And anyway, hooked up the water hose to their shower head, just like we would at a home birth.
Yeah.
And had unlimited hot water, and we, bailed water out with bowls and put water back in when we needed to. It wasn't as fast as she was expecting. And I think it really did play into, like, her brain, didn't really want to shut off the idea that there's people, like, random strangers just walking in the hall,
Yeah.
So I feel like it took a while. And instead of it happening after, like kids normally go to bed and things like that, 10:30, which is usually when you kind of see things pick up as a midwife.
Yeah.
It ended up that it took over once everybody started waking up in the hotel and there was more noise and she didn't have to think about somebody hearing her.
Okay.
Which she didn't make much noise at all.
Yeah.
But in her head, it felt like somebody's going to know that we're doing this.
Oh, for sure.
Anyway, but so really I felt like our stressors we felt we were running against the time clock of when they were supposed to check out. So that was a little interesting.
Okay. Checkout time. Yeah.
Yes. But anyway, so she had a baby.
That is so cool. I love that so much. Like, having an out of hospital birth was so important to her. Yeah. Because I feel like a lot of moms would just be like, an out of hospital birth would be great, but
it's too much work.
It's not convenient. It's not best for where I live. Like, all these things. They're like, well, I'll just give up and have my baby in a hospital because I don't have any other options. But then you hear stories like this, women like this, who to them, this feels better. Like this isn't inconvenient for them. This isn't, too hard for them. Yeah. And they make it work. And I love that. And I think, again, like, that's why I wanted you to share so much because, one, I've never really heard of anybody having a baby in a hotel. And so I'm sure none of the listeners have either. But I wanted to share that, wanted to highlight that because whatever you want, whatever feels best to you, you can make it work. You can get it done, like there's just so many options. And with the Airbnb, I see like the vacation rental like that. I totally get that. I have seen people do, but what they do is they rent it for like the entire month that they're due.
Right.
Which and so
gets expensive.
It gets very expensive. Like, so I mean, that's again, not a likely option for most people.
Right.
Because I mean, you're already paying for so much in a pregnancy. You're paying for your care and getting everything ready for the baby and all the supplies and everything. So yeah, financially, that's not a great option for everyone. But then also, a hotel's not going to be a great option for a lot of people. So just really being so informed on all the possibilities is just so important because really they're limitless. It's whatever you feel comfortable with. There's so many options. Yeah. And I love that.
And I think, like, talking through all of that, we had to have conversations like, what would a transfer out of the hospital or out of the hotel look like,
Right.
How are we going to, how will we handle that? Because nobody really knows we're in here doing this anyway.
Okay. That's what I was going to ask next. Like, did you tell anyone?
No.
It's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, I guess. Cause you'd be crushed if you do all that work and they say, there's no way you can do that here. you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think any hotel would probably see it as a
A
liability,
liability
but
for
you're
sure.
like, we're not going to do anything to you. We're not going to sue you. This has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
We just needed a
A
space.
space, yeah.
And I knew that the likelihood is going to be fine, you know, that everything's going to be fine, but we
Yeah.
also have to talk through all those options
What
of
that
what that
looks
would
like.
look
Yeah.
like. And, you know, who would stay behind and clean everything up and tear everything down and, you know, get all
Yeah.
of our stuff out and all of that. But it did put us in a place where we were super close to the hospital
Mhm.
for her. And
Mhm.
to not feel like she was having to sacrifice like the things that were really important to her in her pregnancy.
I
So
love that so much. And like I said,
yeah,
I love, again, like you just said, that you talked through all of the scenarios and all of the options. And that's what I love
yeah,
most, is most to hear is just how much, because I'm that kind of person. Like
yeah,
I just want to talk through all the
hmm,
different possibilities, all the different options. And I want to know what all those scenarios could look like, even
yeah,
if they don't happen or I don't anticipate on them happening. I just want to know what they're going to look like in case they do.
yeah,
And that's so important. I know there's a lot of controversy even with, just in general, with home births. Oh, well, we need to talk about all of the options just in case. Or sometimes there are moms who are like, oh no, we're not even going to talk about that because we're not even going to allow that to be spoken into existence. And so then they would rather just put on blinders and
hmm,
just put it
yeah,
completely out of their mind, because they think that if they talk about it, then it slowly becomes an option. And so there's, I feel like there's two camps of, let's just pretend like that's not going to happen,
yeah,
or let's talk about plan A, B, C, and D just in case.
right. I'm
So,
definitely a let's talk about all the options.
me
And
too.
I just feel like it's not really giving true informed consent if
Mm-hmm.
you don't know what the midwife's plan would be in all these other
Mm-hmm.
situations, and to be able to come together and say this is what I would do in that situation, as far as like me as a midwife and then them as a client,
Mm-hmm.
saying this is what we would be comfortable with.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people don't even understand, like, if there could be clients that could be so hardcore, like they're not going to go to the hospital when
Mm-hmm.
you tell them. I
Mm-hmm.
haven't ever run into that, but I know other midwives that have.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in the rural areas,
Mm-hmm.
that would happen more so, just
Yeah.
because of the difference in clientele,
Yeah.
I would think. I haven't really run into anybody that's like that in the DFW area. I'm sure there
Mm-hmm.
probably are, but
Mm-hmm.
there are definitely more so where you would see that, where they're like, I don't trust the hospital, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm just gonna stay home. And you're trying to convince them this is an emergency, you do need to go.
Yeah.
But having to explain to some of those people, when you recognize that that could be a possibility, saying, hey, I think that you need to understand where my limits are as a
Yeah.
midwife,
Mm-hmm.
that if something were to come up that that goes beyond my scope,
Mm-hmm.
then I have to recommend a transfer. I have to like tell you that this is what we have to do. And if you won't agree to that and it is out of my scope, then I'm required to leave. And I'm not trying to abandon you. I have to call an EMS and I have to stay with you until they show up. But then that's that transfer over to them. And you can say, no, I don't want to go, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm really going to advise you to do that. You know?
Yeah.
So there are instances in rural America where that is more a possibility.
Yeah.
And those are things we have to talk through ahead of time too. So if
That's,
people who don't necessarily want a birth certificate, don't want a social security card, and that happens everywhere, but more so, like I said, in rural America, where you have to have those conversations of, well, what will that look like to try to get it later if you don't want it now? And um, as a midwife, I have to fill out a birth certificate, whether you want me to or not. That's an illegal thing for me to not do, you
so
know.
do you just fill it out and then not file it, or?
No, you have to file a birth certificate on every birth you attend. So that
So what does that look like
so
for
if
the
you had a
clients who don't want
parent
it?
that says I don't want it, then I'm probably like, then you probably need to just do an unassisted birth,
Okay.
because,
So you
or
won't
you know, I don't think you're
attend
going to
their
find
birth if
another
they.
midwife who's not going to do that for you.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So that would be, they would need an unassisted birth at that point.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Because in Texas, midwives are legally bound to fill out birth certificates for every birth they attend.
Okay. Yeah. I mean,
So,
I was kind of aware of that, but not
yeah.
really. I mean, I attended a birth recently that the midwife missed. And so she was explaining to them that she legally could not file the birth certificate because she did not attend the birth. And so she was explaining to them, like, you know, now they have to go and they have to file it because she was pretty sure that legally she could no longer file it on their behalf.
Yeah.
And so I knew that, but I'm not a midwife and I've never had a baby, so I'm not super familiar with
So a midwife can
all that legal side.
A midwife can file a birth certificate if they actually see the baby born, or if the placenta is still within the mother and the cord is still attached.
Neither of
because
those happened.
You can prove this came from you. It's still going.
I was just talking about how they were going to have to take a sonogram, like proof of a sonogram. She was going to write a letter saying like that she did see them all throughout their prenatal care. And it's just so interesting. Like I watch a lot of SVU, so that's where my brain was going. Cause I'm like, okay, so like there actually are legal ways in which you have to prove where this baby came from. You have to prove that this baby was yours.
Yeah.
And that you birthed it. And yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, like the legal side. I was also talking to somebody recently who experienced a loss and a stillbirth, and it happened so quickly that nobody was able to get there. And so her story involved a homicide investigation.
Yeah,
because
horrible,
so horrible, so hard. Yeah. Like I can't imagine. But it's just interesting when you don't know these things, you don't realize that these sort of things are happening. Like it would never have crossed my mind that she would have to go through that. But also I do understand, I guess, why, you know, like people are just making sure that the babies belong to who they belong to, you know? Yeah. So anyway, I know we got to stay like with the meat here. So I know we were going to kind of talk a little bit about.
Well, before we get to that, I have something that is part of that, but that is part of rural birth that you would find interesting.
Yeah.
So, if like in DFW, if I were to be at a home birth and I were to call paramedics because I needed a transfer, or I was thinking that it could, like, I'm working on a baby or a mom, and I call, of course, when they come, I may have it stabilized before they get there.
Away.
And I can say, hey, you need to go. It's going to be fine. Or I usually say, do you need to come in and take a look? Let me run through everything that has happened. And that way they can write up their note of why they came and why they left. In rural Texas, it gets a little dicey.
Okay.
Because you go, like say we're outside the city limits, and you call and you get like the volunteer paramedics, which all paramedics are not created equal, just so you know. When I first started doing this, I had no idea about that. I was naive to think that they would be able to do all the things, like start an IV. I once called and I had somebody come, and they're very sweet, loving people. I'm really glad that there was someone who could come and get us to the hospital, but they couldn't do anything more than take blood pressure. They could not start an IV. And I had already tried a couple of times. And by this point, I'm needing to do like bimanual compression on her uterus and all the things to try to get to the hospital. And I was just flabbergasted. They wanted to pull over in a parking lot once we got into town and have the other EMS jump in and continue. And I was just thinking, what are we in the middle of? Okay. So beyond that, when we would call, a sheriff or DPS trooper would show up and come inside and just stand there in the doorway like you're a criminal, like you're doing something. They're wanting to make sure you didn't do something wrong. Right. And so it's like they're guarding the scene or something. Yeah. I don't know. I just thought this is the weirdest experience, especially coming from being a student in Dallas to then going there. Anyway, so it is such a different experience because, like you're saying, like they're trying to make sure that you didn't cause a crime scene or you didn't do something
or that something isn't going to turn into a crime scene.
True.
I mean, I would imagine that even if it didn't start that way, it could quickly become that way.
Right.
You know?
Right.
For really any reason. Again, I watch way too much SVU.
Right. If everybody didn't start doing their things, or if somebody I guess also if a parent got upset and they were like turning away help for their child, then somebody could see that as negligence or whatever. So yes, anyway, that was a very interesting thing to learn when I was practicing in rural Texas.
That is so interesting.
So anyway, go ahead. So we want to talk about, what do you want to talk about next?
I guess some common differences, I guess, like you said, between a lot of the families you serve in rural Texas versus urban Texas.
Sure.
What are some common differences between them?
Well, I don't know, maybe other midwives practicing, if they've only practiced in a certain area, only see certain clientele. But even I can tell a difference between Fort Worth clients and Dallas clients, or other, Abilene clients versus those. But even San Angelo, I feel like, was a different animal than Abilene.
Like common, are there like common differences in like their preferences and their priorities? Or
the further out towards the country and the further west you go, the more people have figured out how to homestead and do everything on their own, which I love. I haven't reached that point yet, but I do a lot of those things myself, and I grew up as a farmer's daughter, so I totally understand that that way of life. And but so more, like making their own foods, watching everything that they put in their body, wanting to feel like they're living off the land, not really feeling like they need any assistance from any government help, those sorts of things. And there's obviously different, values in that, like different extremes of that, but definitely more of a thought of, I want to avoid the hospital at all costs. So there's different conversations that need to be had about, that midwifery care can provide a safety net. We do have access to all these medications if we have standing orders with a physician. These are the things I can help with, but these are the things that go outside of my scope. And if we were to go down this road, we would need to go to a higher level of care, which is in a hospital setting. And this is what that transfer would look like. And if we could have done it at home, we would have. So now we are needing to accept some of their help, not just say, when we get there, start saying no to everything. And that can be really hard for those families that are used to not putting extra things in their body. And all of a sudden it's like, well, if we don't accept some of these things, then we might as well have stayed home, and just accepted the fact that something bad could happen. So I think you have to really have those conversations ahead of time about what those different interventions might be and what you could do to help yourself afterwards. And so even postpartum, there's a lot of conversations of, okay, XYZ happened at the hospital, you got fluids, you got antibiotics, so what things can you help your body what can you do to your body to help your body recover so that you feel like you're getting back on this pathway of holistic care and kind of ridding your body of these things you didn't love?
So would you say that in those areas, like that's the leading motivator, is like wanting to protect what's put into their body is why they don't want to birth in hospitals? Or
part of it.
I know like that can be part, like can sometimes be part of the decision here, even in like urban areas. There are crunchy mamas who, are very careful about what they put in their bodies. But I just didn't know if like that was the most common, or if it's like a fear of hospitals.
There's more of a fear there for sure.
Yeah, like I'm just curious.
But I think it's also because here there are the options.
There are the safer hospitals
right
here,
you have more choices for who will take you. You have choices for pediatricians that are like, if you're on a more crunchy or holistic spectrum and you're saying, I don't want my child to have vaccines, or I want to be able to pick and choose which vaccines. In those cities, it's rare to find even one pediatrician that will accept you if you're not going to accept all the vaccines on schedule.
Right.
So
which
those
I find so interesting.
Drive to Dallas. I mean, like from San Angelo, we'll drive to Dallas. Which is crazy.
Like you would think it would be the opposite, because most of the demographic who are living in these areas are very careful about what they're putting in their bodies, and they are very adamant about that. And so you would think that a pediatrician who lives out there, or is practicing out there
Mhm.
would, one, know that already. You should know the
Right.
demographic that you're serving. And two, you'd think that they would be like-minded because they're out there. So I find that really
Right.
interesting
Right.
that they're having to drive into urban areas for more choice. I
It's
find that really interesting.
the same thing happens for, I'm going to readjust.
Yeah, go for it.
The same thing happens even for like pelvic floor therapy. I mean, there were some great options in San Angelo for that,
Mm-hmm.
but you talk about like as a midwife, not being able to, um, not being able to recommend or refer people to that, where in Dallas that is more acceptable.
Right.
You know, a CPM like myself, or like a licensed midwife and a certified professional midwife, I can make a referral for those things and they seem to accept it. Where in you know, small town America, they're like, well, I'm not sure that your license is going to get us paid for insurance if you make this referral.
Okay.
So most of the practices that are more holistic have have gone to a cash pay system.
Mm-hmm.
So like pelvic floor therapists, chiropractors are just doing cash pay because they know that the people like me that would refer them are gonna be able to send our clients to them, but also that's where most of that clientele there has gone to, is they don't necessarily have insurance anymore. They're using share plans.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing cash pay because they've just gone completely away from those systems.
Yeah.
Recognizing that they can get better care without a bigger insurance company.
Yeah.
So there's that as well.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, I definitely knew that like in urban areas, there was more access to care.
Yeah.
I just guess I wouldn't have guessed that the limited access to care that they have where they are wouldn't be like-minded, I guess.
Yeah,
is kind
you
of
would
what I was
think.
thinking. That's what threw me off. Is like, I definitely know that we have much, much, much more access to care here. I
Right.
just assumed that what little care they had there would be similar to them.
You would think that is how it
Mhm.
is. I mean, even if you have like a doctor that comes in cowboy boots and his scrubs, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like he
You think
may
he's
live out on the country,
Yeah.
may have his own, you know,
his own
chickens
farm and stuff,
farm
yeah.
and all those things, but still really believe in medicine
induction
and
yeah.
like Western medicine as
Yeah.
far as fixing any kind of issues. And so that isn't always the case. And even there was one pediatrician in that area that a lot of people did try to get into, but he still wasn't completely bought into the holistic perspective, of course. I mean, he had gone to school and studied Western medicine, but his wife was a home birther.
Yes, she was crunchy and he was not.
Yeah, so he could understand people that had that philosophy, and not, even if he didn't always agree with it. So there were some, but it made it very difficult. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
That's interesting.
yeah.
So I would love to hear a little bit about, like, again, that move that you made from
Sure.
working, in San Angelo, moving back to Dallas. What was initially like, was there any initial like shock to like the way that things were done differently, or just in general what that experience was like?
Well, I've
I know you trained here,
right,
so
I was a
you did have some
student here before.
some experience here before,
right? And the people that I went to practice with, I had practiced with before, so I can just like kind of pick up where I left off as far as that. But I know the first time that I had that I was expecting I might have to transfer. In my head, coming from a rural area, as soon as you start to notice, I mean, like every time I would go to a birth, every time I would plan to like go on call for a client, I would start thinking, like, planning my route from their house to the nearest hospital. I would figure out what the distance was, because in my head mentally, when the birth is happening, I had to think that many minutes ahead. Right. So if I knew it was 18 minutes to a hospital or 30 minutes to a hospital, I have to think this could go badly in this amount of time. When do I need to call it versus do I have longer? And so the very first time that I had a baby that was born, and needed a little bit of help as far as just like breaths. So it
Mm-hmm.
didn't actually need anything more than that, just a couple of breaths with the bag. But you see that it's struggling. In my head, I was like, call 911
Mm-hmm.
to my birth assistant and everything. And they just looked at me like, what?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, yeah, we don't have to do that. We're like 3 minutes from a hospital,
Mm-hmm.
you know? But I think that is part of the difference, or like the changeover in my head that I've had to adjust to. Now, being back, like I've chosen to go back into a home birth practice
Mm-hmm.
and then serve some of those areas, then I'll have to, work on that some more
Go
again.
back to that.
So
Yeah.
maybe that there are houses, that I go to that are in Fort Worth that aren't that very far from the hospital, but then there may be some, like I said, Granbury
Mm-hmm.
or further out where you have to think, okay, how far is this one from where I'm going, ultimately, if I need to have more help. So
that's so interesting.
yeah.
I would love to hear kind of some of your thoughts on like continuity of care as far as
Sure.
urban versus rural goes. Obviously, I would assume in rural areas, you're really getting
Full continuity.
So I would love to hear kind of some of your thoughts, I guess, on like pros and cons.
Sure.
Just really, I guess, whatever wisdom you have to share as someone who has experienced both working in an urban birth center with other midwives and working in rural areas where it's just you.
Sure. So there is definitely some benefits to being in a birth center setting.
Okay.
I'm going to talk about like my preference in
Mm-hmm.
general, but I will say that there are benefits to being in a birth center setting because
Mm-hmm.
you typically are closer to a hospital. It
Mm-hmm.
has that feeling like if you have family or a partner that doesn't feel so great about you being in a home birth setting, then
Mm-hmm.
that offers you the opportunity to kind of have that go between, at least to either make them fall in love with it or break them into like the next baby being out of hospital or in a home birth setting.
Mm-hmm.
So it is nice because most birth centers try to make it where midwives can have a work-life balance
Mm-hmm.
and you're not on call all the time. But what I find is that's kind of a trade-off, and that most home birth midwives don't take as many clients as they would have to even see in their share of the birth center setting.
Right.
And I personally love that continuity of care. I love that somebody chooses me. Maybe this kind of sounds selfish, right? Okay.
No, I don't think so at all.
It's a love language.
Yeah.
Okay. My love language is time.
Mm-hmm.
It is like time spent with me. If somebody chooses me to spend time to like waste their time on, that's like, oh gosh, they love me.
Yeah.
That makes me love them. I mean, you can be mean to me if you spend time with me. I'm like, okay, I don't know. But I'm just saying, I'm saying that when someone has a consultation with me and they are like, you are the one that we want to do this with, then you buy into that.
Yeah.
And you are like, I will go to the ends of the earth to help you get the birth that you want.
Right.
As long as it's safe.
It's that one-on-one.
Right.
Commitment, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
And seeing that, like, I fall in love with them most. I mean, there are some clients that like, I don't know why you're picking me and I don't know that we really click. And there are times where I can say, I don't think this is the best fit, but there's also the ones that are just kind of like, yeah, we get along and it works out. But a lot of my clients are ones that I just fall in love with and they're like, can you adopt us?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I see that and feel that even in my own business.
Yeah.
Like I love all of my clients.
Right.
They're all amazing. And the fact that they choose me just blows my mind.
Yeah.
Every time.
Yeah.
And there are some that I connect with more than others though.
Right.
That's just natural. There are some that live closer to me and that I have more in common with that make quickly and easily make that transition from client to friend. You're just naturally going to bond with some of them more than others.
Right.
And that's, two-sided. Like some of my clients love me and they're like, yeah, you were great. You were an awesome birth photographer.
Yeah.
Bye. And I'm like, bye.
But I was hoping we could hang out.
I was hoping we could be best friends forever. Like, why are you like leaving me? But again, that's just natural that you're going to connect with some more than others. And so me personally, I see myself choosing continuity of care over proximity to a hospital. Birth centers are great and they're beautiful and I love them for some people, for certain births. That's great. I don't see it being, again, what I would choose because like you were saying, and something that's come up a lot in my personal life too, is that when I choose a provider for really any service, my goal is to mate for life. So when we chose a roofer a few weeks ago, like we've made it for life. Like he's our roofer forever. And same with our realtor. And so I can't imagine not choosing a midwife who also I would plan to be my midwife forever. You know? And I think that, I don't know, it's just so important. It's so intimate. Like I would want that one, like you're my person, you know, like you would need to be just so connected. And so I feel like the proximity to a hospital is very important for some. One thing I did too also want to ask you about, because it's kind of, I don't know, I find it silly. I keep hearing this common thing. People are saying they're choosing a birth center because it's middle ground between a hospital and a home birth. And I like, as a birth worker, to me, I'm sitting here thinking, you're cray. There's literally no difference between a birth center birth and a home birth, ultimately, other than the way it looks.
It's my home versus yours.
It's my home versus yours. Like literally the care that you receive, the emergency supplies that are present, the tools and resources that are available. Again, other than like certain birth centers and their 3-minute drive to a hospital, which is great. But other than that, what is the difference between a birth center birth and a home birth? Other than, like you said,
I think that there's benefits to actually doing it at home. But there are birth centers that offer nitrous oxide, and that's not something that I'm going to pack up and carry to your house.
Very rare, right? I mean,
most people don't use it.
Most people don't know that they even have that option, even in a hospital. Most hospital clients are not using that, which
but I feel
is a whole nother story.
It's out of all the times that I've seen it used, it's usually more needed, in a really long birth where most people would choose to go get an epidural at that point, because water is amazing and you can really use the tub, and it usually provides all the comfort that you need. So if you were talking about a really long birth, there might be even a reason that you needed to go to get checked out and do some other things. But most of the time it's used when you're talking about getting stitches, you're having lacerations fixed and you need a little bit of like anxiety comfort, you know what I mean? Because there is even anesthesia not anesthesia, but lidocaine that's being used.
Oh, that'll be me.
Yeah. So we're not so old school. We're going to have you bite a stick and get through the pain.
I mean, I like, even like getting dental work, like I go into a full uproar over the lidocaine shots. Like that will send me over the edge. So that's definitely something I haven't even considered for myself yet. Like obviously as a birth worker, I'm kind of always racking my brain like, what would I do? Like, I like this. I don't like that. Here's my plan. This is what I think I want to do. And you just like totally made a light bulb go off in my mind, because not once have I considered what I would do or how I would feel if I have to be stitched up. Because I have a severe fear of needles. Very, very intense fear of needles. And so I feel like that could potentially be the worst part of my birth experience if that's necessary. I mean, I know there's no way to know whether that's going to be necessary, but
the lovely part about it is that usually you're still on an adrenaline high, loving on your baby. And, there's options to use glue if it's something small. And then if it is not, then the lidocaine is your friend. And so it's not also, we are able to spray it on before you inject some, you know what I mean?
There's like, lots of options.
You can slowly build up to that. So hopefully you wouldn't even notice too much of the prick. But I think you were talking about continuity of care, and I do think that when you're talking about a home birth setting and like having one midwife,
Mm-hmm.
the parts about that make that helpful, or that I feel like are the best,
Mm-hmm.
is having one person who knows everything about your labs,
Mm-hmm.
everything about your ultrasound, everything about your care,
Mm-hmm.
the things you're allergic to, your preferences, because there shouldn't be anything lost in translation, especially when you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about a midwife that takes a few amount of clients per month.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the sweet spot of that for most midwives, and every midwife is different, and so I'm not passing judgment on others, but personally for me, I feel like each midwife can easily balance 3 to 4
Mm-hmm.
per month.
Yeah.
And if they want to do less, great. That gives
Mm-hmm.
you even more one-on-one attention.
Yeah.
But it's when I hit, even like in San Angelo, 1 month I did 5, and I was like, it probably would have been okay if it had been in Abilene, but having to drive an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
It gets really difficult, especially when you get to the postpartum.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't even about the births. It was about that one-on-one time that's really needed in the postpartum period.
Yeah.
When somebody needs help with their latch, when somebody is emotionally having a hard time,
Mm-hmm.
and having that one-on-one care of somebody who can come and sit with you
Mm-hmm.
and not have to think about, well, I have to get back to another client, or I
Yeah.
have more to do. That is really helpful.
Yeah.
Somebody who can come and just like love on you and make a meal for you, or
Mm-hmm.
clean your kitchen,
Yeah.
and just sit and talk to you. And I feel like that's where that continuity really comes into play. And when
Yeah.
you trust that person to be in your house while you take a nap,
Yeah.
and hold your baby or whatever. I definitely am not speaking away the need for postpartum doulas, because they do a great job too, and I can't do it all.
Yeah.
But it is helpful when you have somebody who can see the real you on a normal day, and know that when
Yeah.
you're crying postpartum, this isn't really who she is. I see something in you that we need to check on, that we need to do more, that we need to work harder on, or,
Right.
that there's just more of an awareness
Mm-hmm.
of what's really truly going on in your life, so that I can call that out and I can find you the best help possible.
Yeah.
So,
couple questions.
sure.
Hopefully I don't forget I feel like they're already leaving my brain. One, I did want to talk about what that looks like in more urban settings.
Yes.
Because just listening to what you shared, again, I've never experienced this firsthand, so
Yeah.
I don't really know, but I've never heard of a midwife, either home birth or birth center practice, who invests that much into their clients postpartum. Like I know that they often will do a 2-day visit, but I've never heard anyone else describe that real intentional focus and time, I definitely never heard a midwife talking about helping with household chores or anything like that. And so obviously I feel like that looks a lot different in different areas.
Yeah.
Or maybe that's just
There's some areas
purely Sabrina and Sabrina's heart. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I definitely think that, like I said, that midwives should be encouraging doula care.
Yeah.
I think especially prenatally, especially if you're not going to use a midwife, you should never go to the hospital without an advocate. And the hospital may be great, and your obstetrician may be great, but you don't know who will actually get to show up that day. You should always have an advocate.
And you don't know what you don't know.
Right. So postpartum doulas, same thing. They can provide so much care that I can't be at your house every day.
Right.
But if you need help, those are going to be your go-tos.
Yeah.
But as it's my job as a midwife to make sure that you're whole.
Yeah.
Right. And so if I come over for a postpartum visit, or if I realize you're struggling, then I need to make sure that you have the resources. If you can't afford the resources, or if you can't you don't have access to the resources, then I feel like that's my job to be that resource as much as I can, as much as I have the awareness or the knowledge. And then of course there's things like I'm not a lactation consultant.
Right.
know a whole lot about
Mhm.
lactation. I nursed 5 babies myself.
Mhm.
I have helped lots of women breastfeed
Mhm.
and figure out problems. But there are obviously some things that are going to be out of my control, and I need to like hand that over to somebody else.
Yeah.
And that may be a Zoom visit. It may not be
Mhm.
that they have access in person,
Mhm.
but especially in those rural areas, you don't. I mean, there was like one lactation consultant in town that wasn't associated with a hospital. And
Mhm.
so sometimes that meant, like I think there was a time where she was having twins and I'm having to like find another one in another town to be
Mhm.
able to do those Zoom calls because it had finally gone outside of what I could help this woman with.
Mhm.
So I would, I'll give a shout out to another midwife that maybe like put some of this on my heart.
Mhm.
And at the time she'd offered me a job and I was like, that seems like a lot. And it wasn't where I could be at the time because I had children at home.
Mhm.
And now I don't have children at home. So
Yeah.
I feel like I can be more of a midwife, like do those extra things.
Mhm.
And not
Yeah.
everyone can do that.
Not everybody could do that. Yeah.
But there is a practice in Waco
Mhm.
called Three Sisters Midwifery.
Okay.
Jocelyn Romero, she's an amazing midwife, and her daughter practices there, and they have other midwives. But they have a collective. Her husband, I think, is a pharmacist. And so they have a collective where they actually provide food for people. They provide supplements for people in their practice. And when
Mhm.
you have a baby, they come to your house and make a meal for you.
Yeah.
I mean, they do spend a lot of time.
Mhm.
They have a lot of postpartum visits. And so I think like as a midwife, in my own practice, I think it's important to have like that 24 to 48 hour visit.
Mhm.
And then to come back and possibly, if it's your first baby, have a visit like 5 to 7 days because lots of things are going to change once your milk comes in,
Mhm.
and you may not be on top of it. And there could be jaundice issues, there could be weight issues, and then doing that 2 week visit and then a 6 week visit, but maybe even needing a 4 week visit or follow up weight checks
Mhm.
or all those things. And those
Or
are
even
things that other midwives provide, but
without the
you know,
visits, even just feeling comfortable with reaching out
right.
and just be like leaving. Like I feel like a smaller practice with more continuity,
Yeah.
really allows that safety net. Like I said, of
Yeah.
even just being able to reach out, like
Right. Knowing
and
who is on the other line when they call too,
yeah, not
like,
having to just like not having to call an emergency line and like getting whichever midwife is on call at that moment.
right.
Like I said, I know there are pros and cons
Right.
to both. So, but like, something that has really been on my mind and on my heart lately, are
Yeah.
the scenarios in which things don't go the way we wanted them to go or the way that we hoped they go.
Right.
And the processing of that and walking through that valley and how to appropriately, especially as a midwife, love and care for that mom who's walking through that. And again, creating the space to do that. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like, with the continuity of care that comes with a one-on-one practice, there's really, that, again, that connection and that
Yeah.
intimate relationship. And also for the midwife, the space to be able to walk through those valleys with their clients
Yeah.
more easily, and just being able to rely on that.
I think there's pros and cons to that. I'm going to go to both because I really don't want to like say the way I'm doing it is the only way to do it.
Right. No, because again, everybody's
right.
different. Everybody's wants and needs are different.
Right.
And so,
I think when you're talking about a multi midwife practice, like a birth center setting, then the pro to that is that if one midwife was the person that was the primary delivering and you had a problem with that, it may be easier to have a conversation with a different midwife in that practice to say, hey, this is where I had difficulty, or this is what was hard for me, and is that normal, right? The hard part about that, I feel like in most birth center settings, is there is a tendency to not want to own up to things, even if it's not for yourself, because you don't want to throw the birth center under the bus, right? I've never really believed in that mindset. I feel like if that you should be willing to say, I didn't handle that well.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I'd have done that differently,
Mm-hmm.
and find ways to apologize when it's needed.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that, there are other people that think that that's not really a good idea when you're talking about, liability
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that. But I feel like sometimes when you show up, when you're present,
Mm-hmm.
when you go to the hospital with clients and stay with them
Mm-hmm.
throughout the time,
Mm-hmm.
when you show that you actually care and that you're willing to say the hard things and do the hard things, that people respect you more.
Yeah.
And I've had those moments where one of my favorite clients, who was my realtor,
Mm-hmm.
too. And like you said, you mate for life. That, she let me know that at one point that I let her down.
Mm-hmm.
And I recognize that that wasn't something that I took lightly.
Mm-hmm.
I had moments of, where I cried about it at home because I
Mm-hmm.
hated the thought that somebody felt like I didn't do what I needed to do.
Yeah.
And so I came back to her and said, can we have a conversation about that? Like,
Yeah.
tell me what would have made it better.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes it's not even something that you think you actually, in the moment did wrong. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But just the perception even,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I could hear it from her perspective and go, yeah, that really wasn't that great. And I hate that for you. And,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry if I didn't make that feel good. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry if I made it hard, and I wish I could take that back. I wish I could make that easier, and then of course there's been births that I was like so excited to be there, the 6-week postpartum visit, because I was just like, that was the best birth ever.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to the visit and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
that was really hard.
Yeah.
Were you ever going to transfer me? And it's like, you only pushed, you're a first time mom, you only pushed for an hour and a half. Like, that
Yeah.
was awesome.
Yeah.
Like, I thought it was great. But
Yeah.
in her head, for whatever reason, like, she didn't feel like it was what she was expecting.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish that we could have maybe either done more education to
Mm-hmm.
help her understand, or, whatever. So I think sometimes you have to just like take that on
Mm-hmm.
and let them speak and love on them, even when it doesn't make sense in your head, but to
Yeah.
them, they're having a difficult time with it.
Do you feel like that's pretty common, that even though they were cared for really to the max of a midwife's ability, that at the end of the day, they're still going to feel like they were all alone? They are still going to feel like, things didn't quite go the way they expected, just because at the end of the day, birth is hard. And having a baby
Yeah.
is hard. And you're going to come out on the other side pretty often thinking, wow, that was harder than I thought. And nobody helped me and nobody was there for me. And I was all alone. Because ultimately, she does have to do it by herself.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we all have to birth our babies on our own, because that's the card that we were dealt, nobody can do it for you.
Yeah.
So
I think that, man, this one hits close to home on a lot of levels, just because of the politics in the area right now. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that each person that attends the birth is going to have their own perception of what happened.
Right.
The midwife she sees it in
From her lens.
way,
Yep.
from her lens. The dad is going to see it, or the partner,
through their lens.
right?
Yep.
Then the mom, the grandmother,
and because they all have different
assistant.
filters too.
Right.
They all have different,
or in different triggers,
different experiences, different ideas, different preferences, different priorities, different emotions. Like, everyone's going to see everything differently.
And then time, right? Time changes that. So for most of us, time softens the blow of all the work that we had to do, because otherwise we would never have more children, right? I mean, let's be real. Like, sometimes it's so hard. You're like, we can't talk about more kids today, Dad.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that in 6 months.
How often did dads literally 5 minutes later, they start planning the next one?
Yes.
And you're like, whoa, pump the brakes, man.
Yeah, you're not getting anywhere with her.
You did not just do that. Like,
yes,
you see it through such a different lens than she does. And so that happens so much more often than I ever thought it would.
Yeah.
Dads are like, let's go again. And she's like, get away from me.
Yes. So, time, I feel like, changes that perception as well. Like maybe a mom thinks it was great in the moment. And as time passes and other people share their experiences of what they saw, or maybe she reads more and she learns more and she starts thinking back to little pieces and other pieces come out, then her perception of her own birth is different than it was at right after at 24 hours. And I feel like that's even some of the things that we're dealing with in the world today. So that, I feel like that it really is important. I think it's really important as a midwife, though, to give space for that.
Oh, yeah.
And to say, hey, let's talk about your birth. Let's talk about what happened. And especially when there is some sort of outcome that wasn't what you expected. I mean, when you don't have it can be just as valuable when you have all the twinkly lights and the perfect photos, right? But it is also even more imperative when you're talking about a transfer to the hospital, a baby that ends up in the NICU, some of those things. And you also have to be able to sit and listen if there's anger or if there's frustration to whatever comes from that, and walk through those conversations. And I feel like that is easier done, like I said, when there's fewer people involved. Then I feel like you can really hear a person out more so.
Yeah.
So
okay, so really quick, because we're definitely gonna we're gonna run low on time.
Okay.
You may not know this, but we've been chatting for like a little over an hour now. Time is flying by. But I wanted to ask a couple more really quick questions.
Okay.
Again, like I'm kind of fixated on the continuity of care thing, I guess. One, with the continuity of care and with that one-on-one and those really deep connections, do you feel like there's potential for, I guess the best way to say it would be clouded judgment of, like, do you ever feel like you struggle with, I don't know, I had the perfect way of explaining it a second ago.
I think I know where you're going.
And then on top of that, like, how do you try and make sure you have checks and balances? Like, does having a birth assistant come in who doesn't know this client at all give you any sort of, like, again, checks and balances of, like, hey, maybe you're not seeing this clearly because I know what it was. It was like a level of emotional involvement. Do you feel like your level of emotional attachment to your client ever could possibly get in the way of making decisions one way or the other for that client because you're so emotionally attached or emotionally involved?
Yes, I totally do. I will say that because, I just had a client that I really loved, and sometimes you can want it so much that you're like, I think midwives can want it so much that they hold on to it at home longer than they need to. So sometimes that makes it where you're not able to make those good judgment calls. So I do think you kind of have to put, some sort of wall up until at least after they've had their baby and some of those things. I've had clients that, were new to town. We clicked, we hit it off. They didn't have any family. I thought maybe I should have them over for Thanksgiving dinner and stuff like that. And I thought, no, you can't do that. You have to have set boundaries.
Yeah.
And then once their baby has been born and everything, then if you want to create that relationship or enjoy them in another space or another way, you can do that. But right now you have to make sure that they understand that this is our box, that this is our where our relationship can go. And that's just my personal thought process on it. I don't know if everybody else thinks those ways. But I do think that it's helpful when you have other midwives that you can, like I have other home birth midwives that I visit with and I talk with, and that I can run things by. And then I can say, hey, do you think that I'm handling this in the best way? Is there something that I'm not seeing?
You're right.
And personally, I think that I have an idea for a kind of a conglomeration kind of practice that I don't want to like reveal all the things, but I'm just thinking that it is helpful when you can still have those moments that you're working together, that you can expose maybe your client to another midwife that could potentially show up at your birth.
Yeah.
But also to be able to like say, hey, I think that this is what I felt. Could you come in here and check behind me? Which is sort of like that birth center setting, but still having autonomy and being able to pick one particular provider and not having to have a group practice. But I do think that it is necessary to do peer review, and to be willing to open yourself up to, this is what is going on with this client. Do you feel like I'm handling it well? Do you think, should I be transferring them out of care already? Should I be referring them to someone else? And I think that is where, as far as like some of the issues in midwifery today really are going to have to, like, there's going to have to be a lot more being willing to open ourselves up to talk to other midwives and share those things and see if we're doing, using all of our checks and balances so that we don't get ourselves into trouble. Midwives that don't want to do that, to me, that's a huge red flag. Like, if they're just like, well, no, this, I don't have to chart this, or nobody needs to know about this, or I'm not going to talk to another midwife because I don't want anybody to know that I'm doing this or whatever. I'm like, it's getting dicey.
Yeah. I mean,
so yeah,
that's a red flag right off the bat for anybody.
Yeah.
Nobody,
right.
In any aspect of life,
Right.
things done in the dark come to light eventually,
They do.
and then everybody wants to know why they were in the dark in the first place.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't even know if we got to everything, but we covered a lot.
Yeah.
And it was such a great conversation.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Before we go really quick though, can you share like where anybody who wants to connect with you or chat with you or get to know you better, like where they can find you?
Sure. So I own Cowtown Midwifery, and that is located in East Fort Worth. But like I said, I serve like a 90-mile radius, sometimes a little further. If you're going down, like I said, towards Brownwood area, I love that area. I am on Instagram as Sabrina Elliott Midwife, and then on Facebook as Sabrina Elliott Cowtown Midwifery.
Okay.
And then if you want to know a little bit more about rural birth and my what my life was like as a rural midwife, there is a documentary on YouTube.
Okay.
That is called Country Midwife.
Okay.
And it is produced and put together by a UNT student that it has recently graduated, works at Dallas Morning News now, and her name is Azul Sordo, and she is great. She lives in the near Weatherford area.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's amazing. Okay. Yeah. I'll definitely be sure and add links to all of those things in the show notes and stuff. So those will be easy to find. But thank you again so much for being here and sharing with me.
It was so fun. And you had asked some great questions to get information out there about rural midwifery.
I have so many more, but
another day.
Yeah, another day, another time. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Nice to see you.